Welcome back. My name is Sylvain Rochon, and I'm creating a series allowing me to express my ideas and my writings on my second book called Engineering Paradise, where I'm imagining an ideal world, and we're talking about that and what the ideal world should look like. Excuse me. And and today we're going to be talking about the Ministry of Infrastructure. So again, we're still talking about the executive. Infrastructure is really interesting because I'm an engineer, so of course I'll find it interesting. We tend to think that of infrastructure as bridges, hospitals, energy grid, these kind of things, and mostly because these are big projects that are not necessarily for a single neighborhood, right? It's not for a single city sometimes, like roads in between cities. It's not a single region that benefits from a certain infrastructure project when they're a certain size. And so the transportation system and all these things need to be taken care of. Right now it's in the West, well, at least Canada and US, we call it public works and infrastructure and things like that, and it's just like, you know, it's roads and bridges and buildings. And the Ministry of Infrastructure in the ideal world would still be that, but it would also be responsible for different things. And when we reframe it a little bit as every system that a nation needs to ensure citizens have basic needs met. So it's the hardware. They should be responsible for the hardware and the software that allows the distribution of basic needs, essentially. So that's a little bit like a more general responsibility set for the Ministry of Infrastructure, and that's pretty important. Like it would cooperate with the Ministry of Economy and Trade. It would cooperate with the other ministries and the online system where there's feedback from the citizens in different areas, to determine, okay, what needs to be done, what are the needs. You need to, when you talk about to the Ministry of Economy, you need to figure out, since these are big projects, okay, well, where do we build, using what resources, because that's part of the economy. The natural resources, the manpower, the robotic resources, how do you prioritize these things, right? So there's decision making that happens, which is not completely unlike what actually happens now. You need to check the economy and all this stuff for a big infrastructure project as well. But what we also know is these infrastructure projects are scaled. There are different size or different regions. Sometimes you have national infrastructure projects, like a big pipeline goes through multiple states. Well, that's a certain size, and there's a lot more involved. The budget is higher, things like that. And then you have small infrastructure projects like very local pothole fillings every spring. That's not handled at the national level. That's handled at a very regional level. So public works that's why there's little offices or executions of public works at different levels of government currently. And I think that would still be needed in the future. You still need some boots on the ground and then some responsive AI, robotics, automation that would have different levels of responsibility and feeding off the online system feedbacks, and also reacting to weather conditions and what actually goes on without feedback, to fix things that are broken, or to proactively recommend changes, new buildings, to constructions based on a perceived or real need, right? That could come from other ministries, from the population, and from just suggestions from the people or AI within the ministry. So that has to kind of go on just to keep things going, because again, this is about the provisioning of basic needs, i.e. food, water, energy, housing, these different things. These are really important aspects, because this is why the governance is in place. It's to ensure these things go to the people. Now, just to keep things efficient, because efficiency is the enemy of government, right? Government is not efficient. It makes sure everything's equal. So you have government taking the feedback and deciding on projects, and assigning contracts competitively through a bidding process or other process to private sector that take it upon themselves to do a good job, because they are competing. They can be replaced by another company that may be more innovative, better equipment, better efficiencies, better staff, whatever. So it's essentially the private sector that takes on the projects, whether it's a pothole filling reactive responsibility, taking the contract for a year to kind of react to a community and, you know, take care of cleaning. Like we're doing this right now. Okay, this is not unusual, and then you got to do that. So the ministry is still responsible to have all these projects commissioned. They don't build their own projects. They just kind of assign the lands, make sure everything is distributed, because their role is to make sure everything goes to everybody. It's not to be hyper efficient. Their role is to be equal and unbiased, right? Private sector is the efficient part within that infrastructure to make sure everything has what they need. So that's cool. A lot of it can be automated, like I described. Like you can have drones monitoring the roads. As soon as there's something wrong, boom, the contractor is signal. Okay, well there's a big hole here, or maybe it just comes out of social media because somebody's complaining about things, and then the contractor goes there. But that system is in place. Those drones are there monitoring. The cameras are there detecting the issues. There's an additional need and power for a certain city. Well, that's also in the data, and there's a spike soon that's going to reach some of the limit, the cap limit of production of the current solar plant. Well, then there's a bidding process. Okay, well, we need to build for another solar farm somewhere. The ministry can decide what land to be assigned to it, along with the Ministry of Economy and Trade. And then that parcel of land is the best land for the economy as well as the environment to set aside to provision that city with for the power, or maybe it needs to subsidize a certain program to have more roofs inside the city with solar panels or alternative energy sources, that kind of thing. So it's about regulation and taking the overall decisions for the people that benefit the people most, and the environment and the economy, connected with all the data that's out there that we would be collecting to ensure we optimize and we have as much benefit as possible. But again, private sector is doing the work. Now, there's a couple of things I want to talk about as well in this. Like, even though it's their responsibility, but I think there's a lot of improvements that are, I guess, less usual around provisioning of specific things like water production and the distribution. In rural area, a lot of people have wells. They're getting their own water from wells and things like that. And in the future, we can just do it better. And there's techniques, for example, and materials that we can use now that can give you sufficient drinking water directly in a home. And the water is taken from the atmosphere. And there's multiple research groups that have done it successfully. And with 1 meter square of material, you're going to have 25 liters of water a day, for example, or things like that, even though the humidity may be 20%, only 20% in the air. So if each home, if the ministry kind of subsidizes or encourages each home to have their own device, and the consumer can decide what device it is, what kind, what brand, because it's a free market to have the best product out there, basically, right? Then, if it's encouraged, then you have way less strain in the water supply in big cities, because that's where there's a lot more strain. That's where you have a lot more cost in the infrastructure to provision water. And also the wastewater has to go back and go somewhere. Sometimes it goes to a lake or a river, but sometimes it goes back to a treatment plant. And there's cost in treating the water. So if there's less water to be pumped, that's savings for the economy and the environment. And people get more choice in how the water tastes and how it's provisioned to their home. It's good for everybody. So we have opportunities now where we can decentralize a lot of the water supply. There are ways also to alleviate like what I call the wash water, so things that you don't necessarily want to drink, but it's still drinkable. It goes to the home. You can still drink it, but it's, you know, it's safe, but it's not really like bottled water, you know. What comes out of the air using those devices, you can drink. It's just like distilled water or bottled water. It's great. What comes out of that is drinkable, but it has those chemicals because it's treated, you can use it for your wash, but normally people don't drink that anymore. You can, but people don't. Well, that water you still need to bring it inside cities, just because I don't know. You could provision enough water from the air for your home using those materials, enough to also take your shower for the whole family. But that's a lot of water, and I don't think in the near future people will be able to have this viable technology at a reasonable price at that scale, so that everybody can draw all the water they need from air and other sources without any city provisioning. Because then what happens is that if somebody has a bad luck and the system fails, there's no backup for his water. So you still have to have a certain amount. It can be a smaller amount of water that comes in from the city, so that you still have the cost reduction. You don't need to treat it as much because there's just less volume and less pumping, less energy goes into the pumping. That's good. And that means also, you know, well, it's better for everyone. Now you just haven't as much water that needs to be treated, but that's another part. When the water comes out, we want to decentralize that, because again, this is environmental and economical savings, and also good for us as citizens to have those. If you have your, if you're in the country, it goes back into nature, no problem. Just goes back into your field, basically, no issue. But in urban areas, there's not enough land for all the water use, all the wastewater, so it has to go again to a river, lake, or something like that. But there are some new technologies. Some people have been working hard at making units that could treat the wastewater properly and safely and recycle back into the home or the apartment building, recycled back. So that's coming out, and there's significant effort in doing that. So that's really good. Also, the solid waste, you know, the other types of waste that we generate either from the bathroom or from the water, or no, sorry, from garbage, you know, recyclables, and also organics and all this garbage like the plastics, all this stuff. Well, there's still some technologies out there, especially if it comes from the bathroom, if it comes from the toilet. There are some really nice technologies, like for apartment buildings, for example, that are now in testing, and then for small neighborhoods as well. The solid waste goes in there, and then whatever is water actually goes out and can be reusable water, not to drink, but it can be used in communal gardens and things like that. And the solid waste is converted to fertilizer and methane, so the fertilizer is good again for the gardens, and the methane is great for energy production, because you have production of gas that can be burned for heating, for example. So if we have more of these installations where there is more local recycling of solid waste, then again, great. There's a more local recycling of resources. It's better for the environment, better for the ecology, and better for our pocketbooks, so to speak, which is great. Now, as far as garbage and what we call recyclables, it's a way different ball of wax, because until we're able to decompose these materials into component molecules or atoms, there's really nothing to be done. You have to ship it back to a certain plant that's fairly central, and to be recycled and repurposed into something useful again. Just because we can't trust people in sorting things properly. However, we can be much better, and we are getting much better at automating the recycling, also the transportation of these things. This could all be robotized and AI-ized, so that it goes back to the plant, sorted properly, and there's no need to have the garbage men or the people over there in the recycling plant or the incinerators or whatnot to deal with the garbage and the recycling. We could automate all these jobs, but it still needs to go out. When we are able to atomize all these materials locally in the home, which we will eventually, then we may have also the technology to put it back together into a different form. So an advanced 3D printer, for example, at an atomics that can deal with atomic scale stuff, then you can take your organic waste and make new food from it. I'm not joking. It's the same atoms. It just organized differently. One is wasted and maybe a little bit dirty, and the other one is, you know, brand new food you can eat and quite safe, using solar energy to kind of restructure the atoms. So in that way, once we get there, we'll be able to recycle things directly from the home back into the home, and have kind of reserves of atoms and molecules in buckets here in the walls or whatever in the container into your machines, where you can basically build anything at your home. This will come, but you know, you're talking about at the very least 20 years from now. But so let's not figure that out. Let's just use the AI and robots to bring things and coming back. So that makes it nice, since no one likes to do these jobs. Let the robots manage that. As far as energy production, I already pointed that out. You know, but also we want to have a lot more local production. In rural areas, very easy, put stuff on your roof. You single homes. If your roof is full of modern solar panels, you're good. Now, solar energy, the cost of solar energy is just as cheap as coal, to generate energy using coal. So, and it's getting cheaper. And the sun never goes away. It always comes back every day. You can't run out of it. And everybody can have solar collectors on their roof, or photovoltaic panels. So you can generate most of your own juice. In the cities, because we live in the heights, sometimes a roof is not sufficient to fill the energy needs of the city. But then you have all this solid waste that goes into gas that you can reuse for energy purposes, as well as potentially, especially for industrial complexes that use up a lot more energy. You would have probably local solar farms right outside of each city, because the farther you put the energy production plant, the more loss you have. So if you want to put a solar plant somewhere, it's best to be near where it's going to be consumed. And that would be good usage of land, a good usage of our limited economy of resources. So that's what I would recommend. We restructure the whole thing. We can, you know, decommission all the hydropower dams here in Canada, because all of those artificial reservoirs are not natural flow of rivers. We can bring back the rivers the way they were, and you know, things can flow naturally in nature. Leave nature be nature, and just like near the cities, then you have your additional power plants as needed. Small towns probably don't need those, because typically they don't build in height. So every home can have a very beautiful solar roof. And if you want to check out very nice solar roofs, and I'll forget the brand, but you can look at Elon Musk's, if you Google Elon Musk's solar roofs, they look like black shingles, like of a traditional house, but it's actually solar power panels. And so it looks like it's not an eyesore at all. So we can have really nice roofs, but they also generate enough electricity plus extra. So that's where we should be in the future. Now, I've talked about this before in other videos, but provisioning of foods, again, this could all be automated today. Transportation, production, and what I find, in addition to what I'd like to say about the food production and provisioning, is that we can definitely have an online system, perhaps on the blockchain, just to secure it for the data, but it's not that necessary in this case. And again, the infrastructure ministry is there to set up the system, but it doesn't need to be centralized. It can be decentralized, and that's why I mentioned the blockchain, just to keep the people from believing that there's a control over it, people and private sector, right? because they're the ones that are farming and transportation. They're the ones providing the vehicles and the robots and the AI to do all these things. Because again, a competitive economy is a good economy, right? People want to challenge each other and make a better thing. So, but you have all these things automated anyway. And the infrastructure ministry would be there to help support a system to ensure that the system is in place to support the offer and demand process between the private sector that provisioning the food and transporting it, and the consumers, which is us. So when we buy at the store, for example, like some fruits and vegetables and some products, then those units are being cataloged in the system as being purchased, and they were provisioned by a farm or another provider or whatever down the line. So this is all kind of calculated inside a unified system that everybody kind of feeds in. Again, it doesn't need to be centralized, can be completely decentralized. And it would give data to the farmers as far as what the demand was. Like there was not enough, I don't know, radishes a certain year, because the demand went very high, and because there was not enough productions, there was a purchase and transportation from other countries, even though the capacity, and we can certainly, produce turnips here. So then farmers here with their automated systems could say, hey, okay, wait a minute, I'm going to produce more turnips because there's a higher demand. I can sell more here. So for the next year in the same kind of period, they're going to expect that demand. The system anticipates there's going to be a demand in the following year in those months. And the farmers, through automation or otherwise, can plant and produce sufficient numbers of turnip versus things that were less needed the previous year. There's always offer and demand fluctuations year per year, but a system that would allow this whole private sector provisioning process to communicate and get data from each other would facilitate a whole system where everybody would be able to get food for extremely cheap prices and from mostly, ideally, local sources. Because again, we all have to think about the economic and the environmental impact of everything we do in our society, because that is also benefits us for how we pay for these things. And the private sector companies want to provide the best service because they want to be more purchased, right, by us, by the consumer. So if we build this system, again, it would be on the internet. The private sector companies would love it because they get a lot more data about what's really in need and what's in demand, what's not. We would be able to know, if we get hooked onto it as consumers, what is being produced a whole lot at lower prices, but we'd be able to kind of play the market as well. Like, wow, this year there's going to be a little bit more of that, maybe because I'm running a business that needs to cook things, then maybe I'm going to buy more of this or adjust my menus, or maybe I'm going to try this kind of products because this genetically modified food is now in the market locally, which wasn't before because it was imported. Now I'm going to try it now. So you can have all these really nice information-based interactions that would be in the clear, truly beneficial for the consumer, and ensuring that everybody receives everything what they need without the government being involved in pushing things around. Just need a system and supervision and regulation. That's it. And just let the free market roam, because we're gonna make it happen. Don't worry about it. So I'm really excited about that idea. I'm hoping it's going to get picked up. It's a little bit the same with the transportation system. Again, infrastructure is all about transportation a lot of times. Well, why doesn't it supervise a system, line system, an interconnected system? Just like some manufacturing companies, I believe it's Toyota. They are building in the capabilities into their car to be connected to a network, like Toyota-controlled IoT for self-driven cars in the future, but also a ubiquitous kind of system that it can connect to other brands, networks of interconnected self-driven cars. They're already kind of thinking ahead that this is going to happen. And a Ministry of Infrastructure would need to be on top of this to ensure that because the more the cars and transportation system talk with each other, the safer they are and the safer it is. and also the faster the AI learns if it's a self-driven vehicle. And we can anticipate in the ideal future, people are not driving themselves. It's all AI driven, because we are dangerous on the roads. AI is safe, especially if it's all AI and all interconnected, extremely safe. There's no crazy people drunk, fatigued, or trying to weave inside traffic alongside the AI-driven cars that are completely sane and no problem. So the transportation system can be fully automated, fully privatized, but yet again regulated by a layer that is not controlled by the Ministry of Infrastructure itself, but encouraged and set up in collaboration with private sector to keep things equal, decentralized, because you don't want the private sector to own that either necessarily, right? And depending on how it's structured, you can decentralize it. Again, if you use peer-to-peer blockchain, that's another opportunity where it's owned by the people, the communications go around, the private sector cars providers, the service providers connect to that network, and it's illegal not to, for safety purposes. And then we all have a wonderful, efficient, and competitive transportation system that we can use. And that would be a dream come true, since I don't enjoy driving per se. And last thing, my last point on infrastructure, it would also be responsible to set up a decentralized internet that would allow people to actually have access to internet and participate in all this stuff. In particular, participate in the government aspect, to provide feedback, because part of the basic needs is to have internet access. Everybody in the nation has to have internet access, because that's how they vote. If you're a citizen and you can't vote because you don't have infrastructure in your area somehow to access the internet, that's a problem. If you choose not to purchase an ISP program, or you don't have a cell phone and things like that, well, that's a personal choice. That's a different deal. You're dealing with private sector for these things. But you know, the government would need to ensure that the infrastructure is there so everybody can have the access. And that would be their role. And just like I mentioned earlier in this specific video, you have the private sector doing all the building. The ministry itself is just decision-making and regulation and ensuring the systems are probably unequally balanced for the citizen. So it's like a supervisory position, if you will, and lots of AI to manage lots of the administration to minimize the footprint and bureaucracy. And you have a number of individuals there that talk to the people and cater to everybody's needs and make sure everybody has an ear when there's a need for a physical presence from the governance system, right? So it can be a fairly minimal number of individuals that are actually involved at different levels of government. In the Ministry of Infrastructure of the future, I would think it would be a significant reduction compared to what we have now. Public Works is huge in Canada. It's huge also in the States, I'm pretty sure, because there's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of paperwork, and huge amounts of individuals, and there's no interconnected system that allows private sector to dynamically just plug into a system and just do their thing. They have to go to the government. They have to process things. It's all extremely red tape, full of red tape. And a lot of that red tape is not needed. You don't need all that stuff. We can automate all these things and just high level regulate and intervene if things go a little bit unbalanced. And then you can create new regulation or new infrastructure or a new system to ensure things are balanced. Because the private sector is going to behave in a fairly predicted way. So it's not that. I mean, it's when you try to make a change in the current world that is extremely convoluted, it's hard. But in an ideal world, if you like what we're doing, we're kind of building up from nothing. We just decided, okay, we wasted everything. Now we're building something up. It's kind of, in that sense, it would be simple. If you do it that way. Anyhow, that's enough. I know this was a fairly long chapter, but I think this is a lot of basic, because this is all the hardware. So that ministry is actually fairly extensive, and there's a lot of stuff we can do with infrastructure using advanced technologies that would make our lives so much easier as citizens and as innovators, just to remove all the headaches. I mean, it's amazing. Anyhow, that's it for this week. I hope you'd enjoyed it if you're following me in my process of writing the book. And we will talk about, I believe, the health system and the educational system in the next couple of weeks. Bye-bye for now.